this video, you are going to study about feeding and digestion, which is included in the block 1 of the unit 7 in your syllabus of the first semester of zoology. So, let us understand what is feeding. Feeding is a behavior of an organism that refers to the process of consuming food by which an organism obtain nutrition and uses them for its growth, replacement of energy, respiration and also with the other activities. So, this feeding behavior is an important process for every organisms because they need an energy for various activities of their body. So, let us understand this nutrition which is there in the food is obtained by the organisms with three important modes. One is the holozoic type of nutrition, the second one is the saprophytic type of nutrition and the third one is the parasitic type of nutrition. So, let us understand these different three modes of drawing the nutrition by the organisms. So, holozoic type of nutrition where the organisms ingest, that engulf an whole body of like plants as well as animals are the to draw the nutritions for their energy. So, they are called as the holozoic type of nutritions. Similarly, saprophytic type of nutritions are those organisms which depends upon the dead which feeds on the dead and decaying organic matters and they receive what are called as the nutrition as a soluble particles called as the saprophytic type of nutritions. Similarly, the parasitic type of nutritions where the parasite will always depend upon the host drawing the direct nutritions which are partially dissolved by the host organisms. So, these are the three important modes of nutrition where the organisms derives the energy for their various activities. So, let us understand what are the different types of an organisms that observes and nutritions from the various more types of feedings. There are four important types of feedings that we can observe in the organisms. One is the filter feeding and second one is the deposit feeding and the third one is the fluid feeding and the fourth one is called as the bulk feeding. So, these four important types of feedings where the organisms have adapted themselves residing in various habitats. Filter feeding. So, these are the animals which obtain nutritions from partially suspended in water. It is where an organism passes water through a specialized filter organs present within their body. So, you can observe in this slide some of the polychaetes, snails, claws are the good examples for the filter feeding mechanisms, where they have various ciliary as well as tentacular organs that are found within their mouth for filtering and particles which is suspended in water. The second type of feeding is the deposit feedings. Here, the organisms obtain nutritions from the particle suspended within the soils, either an aquatic trites or dry land animal which feeds on a minute organism deposited that have been drifted by the water. So, these organisms are referred to as detritivorous since they obtain the nutritions from dendrites. So, you can observe in this slide an clam crab and also what we call as several other eels, amphibians and also fishes. Some are a very good example for an deposit feeders, where the smaller particles which are pulled out from the waves or the tidal dries of the lands are fed by these animals are called as deposit feeders. The third type of feeding is the fluid feeding. So, they obtain nutritions by consuming fluids of another organisms. So, these organisms can be hematophagy which they feed upon the blood or they also feed upon what we call as the nectarivorous feeders, and also they feed on the plant nectar. So, these type of feeding animals have a characteristic features of an pointed mouth with have help to piercing the skin of the host. So, in this slide you can observe that the hummingbird which feeds the nectar of the flower, and also the mosquitoes which are feeding the blood and which we call as hematophagy. So, this type of nutrition that drawn by the organisms are called fluid feedings. The fourth type of feeding is called as the bulk feeding. So, these organisms obtain nutrition by eating the whole of the organism, get an nutrition required by eating whole body or whole of the prey. So, the food is broken down into smaller particles and the nutritions are extracted by the process of digestion. So, most carnivorous like lion, tigers, and also herbivorous like cow as well as deer, and omnivorous like in human beings are included in what we call as the bulk feeding. So, you should remember that the bulk feeding which provides the large quantities of an food, where these food particles are broken down into an smaller particles, and this type we call as the bulk feedings. So, we shall understand the feeding and digestions in poriferans. Poriferans are the first metazoans which are multicellular in their nature. Some of the Cycon, Demospongia, Euspongia are well representatives of the poriferans. Poriferans are characterized with the presence of pore bearing organisms. They are completely, and they are majority of them are marine organisms, and few like spongillus are the freshwater organisms. So, these poriferans that you can observe in the Cycon as a good example, the transverse sections of the Cycon is taken, where this having a number of pores in their body. So, they are naturally marine habitats in which sponges lives. The water brings the food as well as the oxygen and remove excretory waste as well as the reproductive waste, because we have to represent here that the sponges are an sedentary form of an organisms. These sedentary form of an organisms, where they are always sessile, that means a single organism where they cannot move from one place to the another place, and that is why they are sedentary forms or colonial forms, where they always depend upon the flow of the water for their feeding as well as the digestion. So, the water currents which are created by the collar cells that are present on the organisms, that creates an current within the system that brings the smaller particles of the food into the body. The collar cells which are found on the anterior cells or anterior region are supported with the conocytes. These conocytes are the cells which contain a food vacuoles. They entered into the conocytes where the digestion will takes place. Conocytes are having an important enzymes that are proteolytic and carbolytic as well as the lipolytic type of enzymes, where they digest large amount of the food particles that are found. Below these conocytes, there are the archaeocytes, or also there are the amoebocytes which are also found. These amoebocytes, they engulf and large particles which are transported from one place to the another place for the process of the digestion. So, the experimentally it was done in the laboratories that when a charcoal powder is added into the water, some of the charcoal particles that move from the conocytes to the amoebocytes region. So, it comes to know that these conocytes are having an certain important digestive enzymes where they digest the large amount of the particles that are present within the food materials. Then these amoebocytes which transports the stored amount of the what we called as food particles in the form of a glycogen and also in the form of an proteins that are transported to the various parts of the body. Since these poriferans do not have and what we call as the tissues or also what we call as the muscle layers, the cells only which are the performs the various digestion as well as the respiration and also excretion as well as the reproduction within the poriferans. So, these poriferans they are very importantly observed that some of the cilia or the flagellates that are found on the conocytes are beaten in a larger waves that create an water current. So, this creation of an water current brings the food particles from the water and enters into the what is called as the systems. So, the digestive enzymes that are found within the conocytes are digested with the food vacuoles and the digested particles are transported to the amoebocytes and these amoebocytes they help in observing the digested particles to the various amount of the body. So, this type of what we call as feeding as well as digestion in the multicellular organisms which perform the various functions. So, diffusion of the digested waste in the form of an ammonia is also transported through the what we call as the incurrent canals of the water. So, this incurrent canal as well as the ostia, osculum and also the outgoing water, these are the one which helps in transportations of the food and also the digested waste into the water. So, feeding and digestion in coelenterata. So, coelenterates are one of the very important phylum which is the largest invertebrate and majority of them are marine in their marine organisms. So, as the name itself indicates, coelenteron, coelo meanings an cavity and enteron meaning an intestine. So, these coelenterons are the multicellular organisms with biradial symmetrical and also they are always having what we call as the tentacles on their body. So, these coelenterates are having an unique as well as the important feeding as well as digestion. So, let us take for example an hydra has a one very good example of the coelenterate which are fresh water forms and they are always attached to the certain seaweeds or to the substrate. So, they are having and tentacles in their structure. So, these tentacles have a nematocytes where the prey are being captured into the mouth region. So, the mouth region we also called as the hypostoma. So, this mouth region which carries the prey into the mouth region with the help of the tentacles or we called as nematocytes. So, the waving of these tentacles within the water that brings about the prey towards the mouth region or the hypostoma. So, where they are passed from the mouth to the gastrovascular cavity and also where they are undergoing an digestion. So, for exit can see observed in this diagram the coelenterons are having an cavity that means it is completely gastroenteron cavity or we also called as gastrovascular cavity. So, when the prey is captured by the help of the tentacles or the containing an nematocytes. So, these nematocytes which feeds upon the small small fishes like small fishes and also they feeds upon the certain prey which comes near the waving of the tentacles, and they are passed into the mouth region. So, this mouth region engulfs the food into the gastrovascular cavity. So, this gastrovascular cavity is containing and certain cells which we called as the nutritive mother cells, and also we call them as the endothelial cells. So, these endothelial cells or nutritive mother cells which are always vacuolated, and they also contain what we call as the granular cells. They also contains the stored amount of the storage cells as well as the gland cells. So, these food vacuoles, mitochondria, they are all found within the what we call as endothelial muscle cells. So, these endothelial muscle cells are lining between the intestinal wall of the gastrovascular cavity. So, when the food is trapped by the tentacles which is passed on to the hypostoma, the food enters into gastrovascular cavity where they undergoes two important types of digestion. One we call as the extracellular type of digestion, the another one we call them as the intracellular type of digestion. The extracellular type of digestion is the one where the food is being digested by an secretory cells of the gastrovascular cavity, which secrete certain enzymes called as the proteolytic enzymes. So, these proteolytic enzymes, they digest this food into a smaller particles called as a smaller polypeptides, where they completely dissolves the amount of proteins that are present in the food. So, that food which is digested upon the gastrovascular cavity are called as the extracellular digestion. The above digested food particles enters into what we call as the intracellular type of digestion. So, in the intracellular type of digestion, the pseudopodias are the cells which are transported into the food vacuoles, where they are secretory cells that are found within the what we called as the nutritive mother cells. They secrete a large amount of the enzymes that are required for the digestions of fats as well as the lipase. So, these digested particles are the directly absorbed by these amoeboid cells that are transported from one region to the various parts of the body. So, we can observe both extracellular as well as the intracellular type of digestion within this coelenterate, or taking as an example of an hydra. So, which hydra represents both as a digestion characters within the lower organisms and also with the higher organisms. Like in lower organisms, they are found like an extracellular type of digestion that occurs, and like an higher organisms like frog as well as the fishes, they also undergo what we call as intracellular type of digestion. So, those digested particles which are eliminating from the body, they do not have any specific excretory organs, and that is why the particles which are undigested particles are expelled out through the mouth. So, this is about the feeding and digestion in case of the hydra. Feeding and digestion in case of ctenophores. So, ctenophora is one of the very important representative phyla of a connecting link between the Platyhelminthes as well as the coelenterate. So, this is exclusively marine, commonly called as comb jelly, and we also call this as what we call as the walnut jelly, because of the presence of the lateral longitudinal combs that are found within the body, and also an comb like structure of like a tentacles that moves from one region to the other. It is inside the marine water. They are commonly called as comb jellies. So, these ctenophores are also having an resemblance with the certain digestive systems which are resemblance with that of the coelenterates, and also with that of an platyhelminthes. So, now if you see about the digestive system of the ctenophora, it consists of an mouth region. Below this mouth region we have the pharynx, or we also called as stomatium, that you can observe within the slide, and within this stomatium undergoes and branching within their body and during the aboral region, and between the and internal below the stomatium there is an instabulum. This intabulum, it undergoes a lot number of canal system, so which we call as intracellular canals, and these canals which gives rise to an intestine and which gives rise to an excretory pores or below the oral end. So, the oral end region, which consists of the mouth region as well as the stomatium, below the stomatium there it contains an certain cells which are produced for the digestion. So, these ctenophorans are purely and carnivorous organisms. They prey upon the small fishes and the eggs of the fish, and also some certain amount of the molluscans. So, when these molluscans are brought about by the tentacular regions and they are passed into the oral regions nearly the mouth region, the mouth passes this food into the stomatium, and this stomatium contains the long pharyngeal region which contains the like a gastrovascular cavity that you have seen in case of the hydra. So, these stomatium regions that are found within this ctenophores, they partially digest the food that are captured by the animal. So, then it contains an two branched structure called as infundibulum canals. So, this infundibulum canals that are having two blindly branchings. So, these further branchings, these infundibulums which are also comparable to what we call as a certain cells that are going to secrete an enzymes, and these enzymes are digested completely within the infundibulum, where they are passing the digested food particles into the various canal systems. So, the infundibulum canals have different branches throughout the body that circulates the nutrition to the whole organism. The undigested food particles that are found within the body that are eliminated through the mouth, or also by what we call as the excretory pore that are located between the aboral region of this animal. So, the ctenophorans are having different canal systems, and also they are provided with mouth as well as the excretory pore, but their digestion is purely and carnivorous in nature. Feeding and digestion in case of helminthes. So, helminthes is a group of animal that includes mainly two important phylum, the phylum Platyhelminthes and also the phylum Nemathelminthes. So, the Platyhelminthes are those organisms which are included by the flatworms, whereas the Nemathelminthes are the round ones. So, these are mainly majority of these helminthes are parasitic in their nature. So, this helminthes like a Platyhelminthes are further divided into three important classes: class Cystoda, class Trematoda, as well as the class Turbularia. So, turbularians are examples like planaria, and Cystoda are examples like the tapeworm, and Trematoda examples like the liver fluke, whereas liver fluke as well as the tapeworms are the parasitic in their nature, which feeds upon the host nutrition and which stays within the intestines of the sheep as well as the human intestine. So, let us understand a little bit about the digestion in case of planarians. So, as you observed in this diagram, the planarians are having a distinct, for the first time it is having a distinct alimentary canal, but incomplete digestive system. So, the alimentary canal includes the mouth region. This mouth is having an proboscis which protrudes from the posterior regions of the body. that helps in engulfing the food. So, this alimentary canal is also provided with the intestine, and then these planarians or freshwater forms where they feed upon the what we call as the smaller crustacean as well as the molluscan foods that are found within the water, and this by beating of their head region from sides to sides they engulf the prey. The preys which are engulfed from the mouth, it retracted inside the intestine, and that intestine will perform what we called as the process of an extracellular type of digestion, and within their body the intracellular type of digestion also occurs, and that transports and nutritions to various parts of its body. So, similarly, in the undigested food particles are being excreted out of the mouth region or also which are called as excretory pores. So, there are also provided with an numerous number of the flame cells. So, these flame cells which are numerous from all the corners of their body, that mainly functions as an osmoregulation, that means removing of the water, excess of water from its body. So, planarians are purely what we called as freshwater forms, and they are not a parasites, and they have an complete alimentary canal, and they doesn't have a distinct digestive system. Feeding and digestion in case of Fasciola hepatica. Fasciola hepatica is commonly called as liver fluke, which belongs to the class Trematoda. So, this is purely and parasitic in the liver of a sheep. It draws the blood and also it feeds upon the nutritions that are found within the liver of a particular sheep. So, when coming to the digestive system, digestive system consists of a mouth region along with the provision of two pairs of suckers that are found within the below the mouth, and below this sucker regions where they sucks the nutritions from the liver of a sheep, and then their digestive system is incomplete because they are drawing the nutrition completely from the organism. There is numerous number of the flame cells are distributed throughout laterally in the body that produce mainly an removal of an water. So, in case of Fasciola hepatica, that is the liver fluke, which is purely attached to the liver of a particular sheep. So, they draw the nutrition and they also draw the blood from the liver, and then the completely digested particles has been taken into the body. The partial type of digestion also occurs within this liver fluke with the what we call as secretions of the gland cells, or we also called as the epithelial cells that are found within this organism, and this epithelial cells that are found which partially digest the proteins and as well as the fats, and also stores a large amount of the glycogen within the particular cells. The mebocyte cells that are present within the gastrointestinal cells that transports the nutrition to various parts of the body. So, the undigested particles are eliminated either through the mouth or through the excretory pores. So, this is all about what we call as a purely parasitic adaptations of Fasciola hepatica, that is the liver fluke. Feeding and digestion in case of Taenia solium. So, Taenia solium is one of the very good example for class Cystoda. So, we commonly call this as the tapeworm because these worms they directly draw the nutrition from the host cell, host intestine. So, these tapeworms or the Taenia solium anchors this animal within the help of the hooks or the rostrum that is present in the scolex, that is at the anterior region of its head. So, when you observe the anterior region of its head in this slide, you can observe there is a presence of pairs of suckers are also present along with the rostrum as well as the hooks. With these three important apparatus, they engulf itself into the intestine of an human being and then draws the nutrition directly into their body. So, there is a completely absence of an alimentary canal. This Taenia solium or the tapeworm, they directly absorbs the nutrition into their body like proteins, like glycogens, and also what called as the fat, which are partially hydrolyzed in the human intestine, like what we call as amino acids and also the monosaccharides and also certain what we call as fatty acids are diffused into the system, and then where they can absorb the nutrition and they can grow completely. So, with the absence of the alimentary canal as well as the digestive system, as these are the endoparasites in the intestines of the human beings, the Taenia solium as well as the parasitic organisms, they always exhibit this type of feeding as well as digestion. So, this is how the digestion as well as feeding that occurs within the Taenia solium with the absence of the alimentary canal. So, dear students, let us understand the feeding and digestion in case of polychaeta. So, polychaeta are those animals that belongs to the phylum Annelida. So, in this phylum, as the name itself indicates, these polychaetes have a numerous number of the setae that are distributed on every segments of its body. So, when these polychaetes are an marine completely, taking an example as a nereis, they are purely an marine in their nature. So, they sometimes lives within the U-tubes or the marine water, and also their body is completely metamerically segmentation with the presence of the setae. So, as in the beginning of this session, as we have told that this polychaetes also perform a types of feeding called as filter feeding. Due to the presence of the numerous number of setae and due to the presence of the filter feeding habitats within this organism, their mouth is provided with the prostomium as well as the peristomial region along with the numerous number of cirrus. So, the digestive systems of the polychaetes are having an complete mouth as well as the esophagus and also stomach and diverticulated CK and also intestine as well as the excretory region called as an anus. The purely polychaetes are carnivorous in their nature. They feed upon the small fishes, molluscans and also certain other organisms that are easily trapped by this tuberculous or tuberculous polychaetes or the nereis. So, when the animals are trapped, they are drawn into the mouth region by the what we call as the polyp or the cirri, and where they are engulfed into and passed into the pharynx. The pharynx, there is a partial type of the digestion that are going to occur where they pass this partially digested food into the stomach region. So, stomach where the large molecules are broken down and certain enzymes that are secreted from this stomach are partially are completely digested, and within the intestine the amino acids as well as the carbohydrates are absorbed as a nutrition to this organism, and the undigested particles are passed into the rectum and completely they are eliminated by the anus. So, this is how that the feeding and digestions in polychaetes that occurs, and that we can see an complete type of an digestive system from this phylum. Okay, dear students, so far we have learned about feeding and digestion in case of the organisms. So, from taking from an metazoan called metazoans to an lower higher organisms of the metazoa, that we have seen about the feeding and digestion, where how they are adapted to particular habitats and also based upon their habitation and food nutritions, their digestive system is also being changed.